So I begin with this to make sure that we all have this awareness together that what we are going to be talking about today is, in fact, is what the Hermetic call the great work, and I want to refer to Hermeticism. And they have this terminology way back. They call it great work. And what is the great work is all about? It's about our own great work as a human. Since after we survive, we stay ourselves nourished, we become healthy, what else in life that we are supposed to be doing in this life? The Hermetic sages in the old days, they call it this great work because this is what we are supposed to do as a human destiny. And this presentation involves this thing called correction perception, which is a personal level of correcting our right perception. And technically, what we are talking today is about the modes of knowing, the modes how we experience as a human. There are three modes that we are going to talk about today. I'm sorry, my cat's walking around, but I think that's fine. and the next one is, this is also part of human evolution in consciousness. And this we do not only on personal level, but as a humanity as a whole. It is done collectively. And as far as the degree, our Masonic degree goes, we always hear this term, purification of the soul. Though it sounds like a personal thing to do, it is a personal thing to do. But whatever we are doing when we are talking about purification of our own soul is, in fact, will lead to the impersonal aspect of reality. So this is the thing that I think that we all should be aware of before we dive into this topic together. I start with duality. I think we all heard this term. I also have heard of this term long before when I was a kid. And I thought I knew what it is according to dictionary, but I never actually know what it is. So I decided to bring the definition from the dictionary. It just says the quality or state of having two different or opposite parts or elements, which to me it doesn't make any much sense. So I give you this breaking it down into realms of reality that we can feel through duality. The first one, we look at senses. We can feel that through the through the sense of touch. We can feel hot or cold, and this is example of duality. And when it comes to auditory sensation, we can hear sound, or we hear nothing at all, which is silence. So all those noise become one duality, one polarity, and silent is also another polarity. And it takes two to have the experience. That's why we call it modes of knowing. So duality is there for a reason. Duality is how we experience reality as a human. And when it comes to visual sensation, we can talk about dark or light. So this is the sense. When we move to mentality, we have things like or dislike. We have things like good or evil, good and bad. And in terms of emotion, when we feel inside, we have joy and sorrow. And many of our human emotions spring out of all these polarities. We have so many terms for joy. Happy, glad, these are subsets of joy. And we have so many things that we can call sorrow. And I don't think that animal have any kind or have too many for example, like a cat. A cat might have the only version of hurt. They don't have different varieties of feeling. And then we move on to morality. Then we have this duality again as a human. We don't only feel in terms of physical sense, but also mental and also morality among human. We have right and wrong. So right and wrong is an invention within duality. And this thing are trained. We are trained to see things as right. We are trained to see things as wrong. So it's this condition. Just and unjust is also ideology and also human concepts, belongs to duality. And then another example, integrity, honest, right? And then we have on the other hand, dishonesty. Before we can imagine back in time, before there is the first person in the world who said that something is just. That moment when someone say just, unjust also co-arise. When someone say right, then wrong arises. So before there were good people, there was also no bad people. And once there are bad people, there's a good people. So this is duality. So if we take duality into spiritual sense, you have things like masculine and feminine. I'm not talking in terms of physical gender only, but I'm talking also in terms of metaphysical experience that we have as energy, like masculine energy or feminine energies. And we hear things like this in all doctrines of the world's religion. And then we also get to be familiar, especially in this part of the world, where we get to hear this word about, the duality of birth and death, especially in Buddhism and Hinduism. But technically, everybody talk about birth and death. But when we put into spiritual sense, and you can see that birth comes after death, death comes after birth, is cycling. Pure and impure is another sense of spirituality. Time and forever. Time as a finite time. What is the opposite of finite time? Then we have this thing called forever. The continuation of time endlessly, infinite. So that is also duality. So this is the first mode of knowing. I just finished duality, but the topic of this presentation is beyond duality. Let's see, after we understand duality, what's next. You can see that in Western traditions, they symbolize this duality in terms of the moon and the sun. And also in our tradition, in Freemasonry, the moon and the sun also represent duality. And in the East, you have this symbol of yin-yang, where you can see black and white as a duality. You can see that in fact, all of the traditions, they will have some symbol or doctrine pointing to this reality first. In Buddhist, we have this symbol of samsaric wheel, the wheel of birth and death. And the wheel of samsara is also represent duality of the human experience. So I stop here a little bit to point out the importance of learning about duality. Many people might ask why we need to understand this. It's total normal. It's total normal experience that everybody has. So we know of duality, but we have to be aware of duality as a knowing process. Duality is not reality. This is very important. Duality is only experienced by the observer. You have to be there as the observer to feel polarities, and that's how we feel the experience across the spectrum, from joy all the way back to sorrow, and sorrow all the way up to joy. To be free from all opposites, because we know now it's not reality, it's just only an experience, interpretation. And dwell in harmony of the higher truth. Once we know of duality, the only way to go forward is to be aware first that we are in duality. And once people understand this and know that this is only just relative experience, we need to know hot so that we can feel cold. And you can see that something hot or cold for human might not be the same for the bacteria or viruses. You can see that this thing changes according to the observer, so it cannot be the highest reality. Once people starting to understand duality, they move on to the next mode, the second mode of knowing, the second mode or the second kind of consciousness, which is called monism. This is a word that comes later on in human history, but way back, if you look at, for example, like Hinduism, which is like 4,000, 5,000 years, they talk about the concept of monism even before the West come up with the term of monism. But when you go back to the Greeks or the Egyptians, they also have monism, which we know more today by the word oneness. And I think new generation are more familiar with the term oneness rather than monism. So from the dictionary, monism is a viewpoint or theory that reduces all phenomena to one principle. So technically, oneness is the understanding that before all the dualities, the separation that we see, everything springs out of one, the source. So that is the understanding. And you can look at the way I designed the graphics here so that you can see that you can see the graphic on the right, duality, and the yellow one with this white circle on in the middle is represent oneness. This is duality. You see others, you see things, you are in the middle. So they are subject and object. But when subject and object merge, you feel that sense of oneness. And I believe that many of us who have interest and practice some spiritual practice or whatever kind of tradition, we have that sense when we get to the oneness consciousness where we can see things as whole, but not always that we can stay there. Then we come back to duality, and then sometimes we go back up to oneness. So this is what I refer to as monism. If you look at some of the symbols from the North in Scandinavia, they have this symbol long before. And you look at this symbol, you see a tree with leaves and roots, and you can see that they are pointing out to oneness of life, where you have snakes, both in the tree branches and also snake down below. In the good there is bad, in the bad there is good. So this is an old symbol. You look at the Egyptian sun, right? The Egyptian also have this oneness symbol. Many times it represents the sun and many deities that represent the highest truth in the phenomenal world. In the Celtic Triskelion, you see at the bottom, you can see three waves that co-join together in the center that represent the realm of body, physical body, the realm of mentality, and the realm of spirituality that connected as one. And it also represents to nature, cosmos, and the basic elements. Something like this is always pointed out by the ancient people. And I think up to this point, it is very magnificent that when we are talking about spiritual progress or spiritual quest or even seeking enlightenment and liberation, it all comes down to correcting the perception from duality upward to oneness. And at oneness, you can see harmony. Have you ever had that experience in life where you're in a situation and you can see polarities and you feel you are entitled to either part or either end of the spectrum? And there are times that you see conflicts. There are times that you feel you see harmony within the conflicts. Those are experiences of oneness. So when we understand and see that part of the progress is to correct one's own perception, this is the symbols that showing us that the ancient people have been trying to tell us this. There are things that I want to point out as well. when people move from duality into oneness, now we see the world as one, right? But by talking about oneness, you also imply duality, isn't it? You can talk about the concept of duality without understanding oneness, because duality is a lower truth. And everybody in the lower truth agree with each other when they look at duality. And they judge, live by, and continue their life based on duality. When someone moves up to oneness consciousness of monism, when you are there, right, you start seeing the whole, but you still see duality. So this is a point, because why I call it pseudo oneness, because oneness is only a transition point. Beyond duality, three modes of knowing. One is duality, second is monism, oneness, and the third one is what I want to introduce to you. This is called in English non-duality, non-dual. And there's only one dictionary that I find in English that have a definition for non-duality, and it's a very mouthful. I will just repeat it quickly, or you can read it along and to try to understand if you can understand from the dictionary. A doctrine of classic Brahmanism holding that the essential unity of all is real, whereas duality and plurality are phenomenal illusion, and that matter is materialized energy, which in turn is the temporal manifestation of an incorporeal, spiritual, eternal essence constituting the innermost self of all things. It's a beautiful description, but I found a better translation and direct. And in fact, this definition that I'm going to share with you is my first experience of understanding the meaning of non-duality. I didn't learn it from English dictionary, but from the Sanskrit, which is from way back from the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, and the Upanishads. They have this word called Dvaita, and non-duality is called Advaita. Dvaita means twi, dual or duality. It's in English and also in many European languages. Dual, zwei, zwei, like in German, drei, zwei, ein. All this come from the same root in Sanskrit, means two. So a suffix, the a suffix is the negation of the following term. So a Dvaita just means not two. I don't know how you feel when I understand this. I got kind of goosebumps to understand that what they are telling us is that we all seeing two. Two in terms of duality, two in terms of subject and object. You see? And the ancient people in the Indian valleys, in the Indus valleys, are telling us 4,000, 5,000 years ago that it's not two. It's non-dual. I think this is the most beautiful and direct translation of the word. But non-duality is something unexplainable. We can only try to explain what it is, but we can never actually be able to say what it is. So this is only an attempt to explain the unexplainable. So I chose 4 phrases or terminology that we always come across when we undertake spiritual reading or learning. There are times that you get to hear this word, the soul or soul of man. And I think that by seeing this in opposed to duality, and you can understand that at duality you see masculine and feminine in terms of gender or even spiritual energies, masculine energy, feminine energy. But in non-duality, it's neither both. So they have a term called soul of man. So next time when you read and hear, and you will know that this word points to non-duality consciousness which is very hard to be written. But at least for the sake of communication, people try. Eternity. Eternity, you can see it as a birth and death. In duality, can be reconciled to non-duality by the term eternity. Negation of both, not two. Not birth, you've never been born, and you're not going to be dead. The body is dead, the egoic mind is dead, but the consciousness never been born. So how can something never been born be dead? So that the non-duality concepts. And when it goes to the third one, perfection. Just so you know that this word perfection is not the same as everyday usage of the word perfection that we use. Perfection in spiritual sense, in non-duality sense, it means there's nothing needed to be done. That's why it's called perfect. It means something that need not to be filled. You are already complete. Grace is given. You don't need to ask God for grace for Christian. Or in Buddhism, Buddhahood is always there, but the ignorance of the person is something that needs to be done. But Buddhahood is already there. So perfection in opposed to the duality of pure or impure. So this is a pointer to tell us that there's nothing you need to do to be worth it. There's no merits to make. By a sense, you're already there. So that's perfection. That's non-duality. Another example is time, finite time and infinite time can be reconciled to non-duality as timelessness. Many of us who are familiar with Buddhism, there are this term, agaliko. I heard it since I was young. Even though I'm not a Buddhist, I was born a Catholic, raised as a Catholic. But living in Thailand, I get to hear some of the terms, which I have no idea what it is. And only until when I understand this concept of non-duality. And it is so amazing to understand this point of view that before time and the end of time, the absolute truth is there's no time to begin with. Time is a concept, it's a human construct, it's a real experience. We don't negate that, but we cannot take it as the absolute. Time, finite time, belongs to duality. So non-duality is the way forward. So you can see three modes of knowing, from duality to oneness, and then you move on to non-duality. Let's put this into some perspective by showing you some symbols. Symbol that the ancient been giving us a long time to decipher. So I show you with the right first, the Zen Enso. You can see how beautiful it is when you get to see that it looks kind of similar, even though they come from different time frame of the history. It comes from different culture, and many of them are isolated culture and tradition, only to be found by our generation, that we can learn all this freely. So you can see the Enso is an attempt to write something out of nothing. That's the Enso. In fact, they don't want to say anything. The Zen Mahayana Buddhism, the concept of non-duality that they are pointing to, they don't even try to make a logo out of it. But if they have to, that's the Enso. The Ouroboros of the Egyptian, you will see a snake eating its own tail. And that represents the spiritual journey that we have to get rid of the subject by understanding that the subject never exists. It only appears to exist. And we move on to Sufism. They even have the similar non-duality symbol, the one with Allah. And that is also the same thing. When Muslim realize the highest truth and become one with Allah. One with Allah means dissolve into non-duality. And that is the consciousness. In Thai Buddhism, Khmer Buddhism, or Myanmar, Theravada Buddhism, we have this thing. I think if many of you are foreigner, you've been living in Thailand, I think you've seen this before in Thai taxis. If you look at the ceiling of the car, and you see this kind of, they call it Yantra. I've seen this since I was young, and I think that you get to see this sometime in Thailand as well. But the reality of the Yantra is a geometric line that represents the whole spiritual awakening journey of man. You can see at the bottom where you start as a confusion. You're very confused in life, you walk in circles, and you try to find something up there, and then it's still a circle, and you're still confused, up until the point where everything is finished. That's when you become in union with truth. This is also a non-dual symbol. Another word is a symbol that points to non-duality. Because in the strictest sense, you cannot have a symbol for non-duality. If you want to be pure non-duality, you can only have a symbol in duality, pointing to non-duality aspect of reality. So before I finish, we all been to the rituals and we see this floor. And besides from being the ground floor of King Solomon's temple of the soul, that signifies that we are an unfinished work. It's not literally as a King Solomon temple. King Solomon temple is a temple of us. It's our temple, which is an unfinished work. So the ancient Freemasons put non-duality symbol into the craft as well. And when you can see at the checkerboard, you can see the checkerboard have duality in the middle. If you look at the carpet, you can see black and white. That represent duality. And the edges have another black and white triangles. And that represent non-duality consciousness. And isn't that amazing, all brethren, that when we have rituals, we are standing on top of this carpet saying that it is a firm ground of duality. We are well aware of duality, and yet we also well aware of the absolute non-dual reality. And that is what the craft trying to point to. Also, we have non-duality aspect in Freemasonry as well. Lastly, this is a summary, 2 pages. From 2 or 1 or none. I think that is the great work. We started from 2. We see things as separation. Then we realize we come out of the same thing. We are the same thing. And that's 1. And once you give it all up, leave it, drop it, that's where duality ceases and non-duality is. By correcting everyday perception of empirical human experiences, going beyond duality and growing into oneness. And when you drop it all together, and that is non-duality. And this whole words that I just said represent what is already in the first degree tracing board. And you can see that how is that amazing. And I've never heard or never learned about this just until I came to learn more about the symbols and started to see similarities with many traditions that I'm familiar with, like Hinduism or Buddhism or Christianity. Lastly, this is a lot of words, but I think it's very important because there are times in our life that we are training our mind or unconditioning our mind or deconditioning the mind just to go back to where it makes sense spiritually. And many times we feel like we get there, and sometimes we feel like we want to go back to the state and we just can't. So these are things that I use with myself. Anytime I want to come back and feel or make sure that I see things clearly, I come back to read all this. And this is my personal notes. So in duality, our goal is to understand the usefulness and the need for duality as a knowing process of human experience. We don't try to demonize duality. A lot of spiritual practitioners, once they learn of duality, they negate it. They try to get away from it. The way forward is not to demonizing it. The way forward is not to try to kill it, but just to accept, to recognize, to act accordingly, to detach from the meaning. Since ultimately there are no meaning. Ultimately there are none. Meanings only used and only good here. And as far as communication is concerned among human beings, of course, duality is still there. If you go to the court or you are in, dealing with law enforcement, there will be duality, and they judge you by duality. So, for us to recognize, act accordingly, and detach from its meaning. Then, when we move on to oneness, dwelling there in the realm of oneness is a state of consciousness that is all-inclusive. You don't separate things. You don't see separation. Embracing eternal presence that allows everything to happen, whether it be people, situation, or events. There are times that people, situation, or events are not like what we wanted to see, but we find ourselves in that situation. Being in oneness is to flow with it, to be conscious and to be aware, without trying to control the end result. This is just words pointing to that consciousness. And the last thing is, when we move on to non-duality, we always have to remind ourselves that joyful participation with life in non-duality consciousness is the effect and the cause within itself. Why joyful participation? Because many times you see people, whether they're Buddhist monks, Christian monks, or they don't even have to have monastic life. They can be normal laymen who seek spirituality. Sometimes it happens to them, even to myself in the past. There's a little sense of withdrawal from duality, and things become dull. And that's not the end result. That's not there yet. Being there is joyful participation with life, without judging, without thinking, pure perception. But there's joy in there. Very important that we embrace life and be the creative energy. So that is joyful participation. If someone is doing non-duality practice, but they seems to give up life and they don't see hope for anything in life, or even sometimes in distress, that is a work in progress. The effect and the cause within itself signifies timelessness, signify there's nothing to achieve. We are not trying to achieve anything anymore. Spiritual practitioner in duality trying to achieve something somewhere in the future moment in time. That's duality of spirituality. The non-dual aspect of spirituality is to understand that we are all perfect. Because the mind, there's nothing to train the mind. Many Buddhists spend 20 years training the minds, 30 years training the minds, only to find out that there's nothing to be trained in the mind. All we need to be trained just to cease all activities from the mind, and when we see reality in non-duality, which requires no extra effort from the mind nor the psyche. That's what it means. Only the will of the practitioner. The will comes from presence, doesn't come from the past, doesn't come from the future. Present for presence, and that's where reality is. I finished with the last page of the presentation. This is the classic duality, day and night. These three celestial objects floating in the universe, the sun, the earth, and the moon. And the sun sets, we see it as night. And when the sun rises, we see it as day. And then we go by having a cyclic time. Everything repeats itself. And that kind of experience is the duality. So duality is in fact the illusion. But there's nothing wrong with it. Illusion is our friend. Illusion is where we need to be in order to recognize the opposite of illusion, which is absolute truth. So we need illusion to be there. But if you look at the reality, when we undergo the great work, not social reform, but instead personal reform, getting to know ourselves. When a person do that, it's just like the robbers. We are eating itself. The subject, the observer, is undergoing the process of dissoluting himself. And when he understands that reality, he knows that in fact the sun never set, and the sun never rise, and the moon only borrow the light from the sun. And that is the consciousness of man, and that is the reality. The absolute reality is the sun is always there and it never sets. Only us on earth see duality, see relativity. And that is journey of the three modes of knowing, from duality to oneness. And when all this stops, non-duality arises. So mote it be, brethren. Thank you.